Welcome, Amit Prajit. Welcome to my show. So, before we get started, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm so you know my name. I'm Amit Sujit. So I'm from Kolkata, and right now I'm working at Rakuten in their India office in Bangalore. So apart from that, I am very interested in competitive programming, machine learning, and thank you so much, first of all, to invite me on this show. And
It's my
I
pleasure.
would love to interact. I would love to interact with your audience, with the viewers you have, and would love to know what how I can help them. So yeah, that's about me. I love solving problems with code, and I'm a very I run community, so I have a small community where I mentor some of my juniors as well as like basically I find time apart outside my work to motivate other people to code and learn code and build stuff. So that's it about me, and I am still learning and growing. Yeah.
All right, taking from there, you are a software engineer in Rakuten, right? So,
Yes. Yes.
what's could you please explain us what's actually your role in Rakuten is, like which department you work on and what exactly the work you do?
Right, right. First of all, I would talk a bit about Rakuten. So Rakuten is e-commerce. It's actually a multiple domain company. It's like cross domain. So, but mainly they grew up as an e-commerce business out of Japan, Tokyo, Japan. And from e-commerce, right now they have multiple businesses starting from finance to sports to like travel and multiple business. I think I don't know the exact count, but there are more than 70 to 75 different businesses that Rakuten is currently running. So I am currently working on the e-commerce platform, e-commerce software, and I am a software developer there. So I work for the logistics team, and I recently so I worked as an intern at Rakuten, and I got the PPO offer, and they offered me a full-time role. So yeah, I am working as a software developer there, software
All
engineer.
right.
Yeah.
All right. So, this one thing is very curious. I'm very curious about like what is a logistic division? Like, what's the need of a logistic division? I don't even know what logistic is.
Right, right, right. Yes. So first of all, okay, I think let's break down the business of an e-commerce. It's very simple e-commerce, the pipeline that happens. So let's take a simple website, let's say xyz.com. So you go online and you book a small gift item, and you buy that on the platform. You pay that through a payment platform. Once that payment is done, and so first of all, before even booking, you go through a lot lists of items you want to select, right? So you buy something, you pay that, and it's done from your end. Now everything that was happening online is done. Now the product has to go out from the inventory or whatever, like in terms of, so at Rakuten we call it warehouse, even at other companies. So if I am open to share company names,
Yeah,
am I open to
absolutely.
sharing?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
There's
yeah,
no the limitations.
okay. So yeah, even Amazon calls their inventories as warehouses. So we have warehouses, and warehouses are like like big godowns. Okay, they are very big godowns where the products are boxed and stored. And whenever you have an order, so initially, very long time back, there were manual people who used to pick out that product, whatever item. Let's say your gift item you book, go that, pick it up, wrap that, and send it through a courier to your house. But as we are automating stuff, growing day, every day, so the number of orders we are getting, like any company, any e-commerce, so especially in this pandemic period, everything is online, right? So the number of orders is huge, and doing it manually is not possible. So if I could, I would love to, if you could check out like how recently multiple warehouses work. They have robots. Okay, so robots go and pick the items from the shelves, and they have been programmed in such a way so that everything can be automated. Like in a huge warehouse, there would be maximum 10 to 20 people needed. Otherwise, 90% of the stuff are done by bots and automated algorithms. So logistics is that part of entire pipeline where after you book the product, that product comes to you. So all of that part, so after the software of the part basically which you cannot see, the part which the customer cannot see, I book the product. That product has to be placed properly, that product has to be chained properly from different suppliers, it has to go to right spots, and it has to come to my home or a fulfillment center near me. Okay, so that entire chain where the entire, so where the idea hits the road, so where the product hits the road, it comes down to the road, and through trucks, through trains, planes, however it is, all the supply management, all the logistics, all of that, that goes after the product is ordered until you receive it at home, at your home. So all of that is a part of delivery and logistics.
All right. So, like hearing that, I exactly kind of resembles it. Like we read that black box software implementation, like where we know the
Right,
first and last part, and we don't know the middle one.
right,
It's exactly the same.
exactly,
Like we don't know anything about how is this being delivered, or how is this processing, how is
right,
the chain going. Like you
right.
pointed out that this is
So
about supply chain. Like what exactly? Like
correct.
if you could tell me, like what are the name of the phases and what are the importance of that phases are going.
Correct, correct. Got it. So yeah, I would tell you, I would definitely love to tell that. So what happens? So I just want to know, like, have you have we so many most of us have booked products, right, on online applications like that. So we see that this product has been shipped. So there are stages. A product has to be shipped first. So the shipping is a stage where the product has been identified in the warehouse, and basically from the warehouse it has been left. So basically the item has left the warehouse,
Yeah.
basically it has left the warehouse and it's ready to go, right,
All right,
ready
all
to
right,
go
all
to
right.
your home.
Sorry to interrupt, but let's take an example. Suppose I ordered a
Right,
book from a particular,
right,
like let's take Flipkart or Amazon. I ordered a book,
cool,
and
right,
that they said that will come after 15 days. So could you
correct,
take me the process of this 15 days journey?
correct. So what happens, okay, cool. So first of all, you book the book, your hard book, right? So then you, so the order basically goes to the merchant. So whoever is selling the book, let's say some kind XYZ publications, so they are selling the book. They have a merchant signed application of Rakuten or Amazon or whatever it is, merchant side application of that. So they get the product. Do you think someone is sitting there and accepting it? No, it's completely automated. So they get the product, and they say, they check that whether that product is available or not anywhere. So now there is so there, everything is 90% of it is software automated. So I am sitting at Kolkata right now, and it would check that what is the closest inventory, what is the closest warehouse near to me that has that product. Why do I check for the closest? Because the closest I find, the faster the delivery will be, and the lesser cost it will be for the company. Because the more delivery cost I bear, it's my loss, the company's loss. Because I
Absolutely.
cannot take 1,000 rupees from the customer, right? Because the customer has a limit of paying. So, so yeah. So I'll check what is the closest warehouse to the customer. And once that is found, that is located, that all of this happens automatically. Once that is located, a notification or some kind of prompt is sent to that warehouse, and that item is located and packed. Now there are algorithms at Rakuten that automate all of this packing and stuff also. Like you book three items, you book three books, and you order three books, and all of those three books has to be binded together, like binded as in packed together, right? So packed together, you have to like stamping has to be done, like where it has to go, batch. You have to batch the items. Like one truck would go to the eastern part of the country, eastern part of the state, one truck would go to the western part. So from those warehouses they are shipped to smaller zones, smaller delivery zones. So these delivery zones are like temporary places. So these places, so okay, I didn't explain this. So once they are packed and the stamping is done, there's a notification being sent to the customer that your product has been shipped,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Now once the product has been shipped, an invoice will be generated. What is an invoice? So basically, invoice is like a bill or a very formal bill that ensures that your product, I am going to sell your product, and that's for sure. And this is the receipt for that. So the invoice is generated, and that is generated only after the item is released, because there can be multiple things. Like for example, my software is not able to understand. So let's say in the warehouse I have 5 books that you want. Okay, stock of 5 books that you want. But when the books are selected from the warehouse shelves or whatever it is, wherever it's stored, while the inspection process, there can be scanners or things involved. While the inspection process, you find out that the books are burnt, or books are, like not in a good condition to be, delivered to you. So in that case, we cannot give you an invoice, because we can only give you an invoice if I sell you the product. So only if the product is shipped successfully, then only I'll give you an invoice. So in that case, what will I do? I'll delay the process. And once the newer supplies come in, or it can be either I can wait for a new supply, or I can change the warehouse. I can go for a next warehouse which has the items you have ordered. So that's the process that happens at the back end for the warehouse. And now once the item is released, once the item goes on the road, and so they can be like, if it's interstate, you can take flights. They can be, most probably, as far as I know, like Amazon uses flights, Rakuten uses flights for interstate, inter-country as well. Trains, I'm not very sure, but anyway, that's not what we are focusing here. So the product basically hits the road, and they come to temporary delivery zones. Okay, so temporary delivery zones are nothing but, you can think of it as a hierarchy, right? From the warehouse, it comes to multiple delivery zones. So delivery zones basically distribute the items based on the district. So based on the address, they distribute it on the district. So after that, it's sent to either the local distributor units, or like the authorized people who either would be of Amazon or of let's say there are delivery units like e-cart, and some people are like who come to your home and deliver. So they are third party people who go to your home and deliver. So these things are handed over to them. So at every stage as they go on, so we just keep on updating the customer that this product is in this stage.
Yeah. I absolutely saw that.
Right. So the updates that happen, they are completely automated. So whenever a product is received, there is an acknowledgement being sent from that unit, and that acknowledgement is being sent back to the server, and that server tells that this product you ordered and you have acknowledged, and we have acknowledged it, and this product is currently at this place. So that's the status. Now, right. So right now the product is at your delivery zones. Now I'll tell about a little bit specialized about Rakuten. So Rakuten, even Amazon has this. They are called fulfillment zones, right? So what is a fulfillment zone? So when you go to US or some places, US and Japan, so this is not much prevalent in India, but fulfillment zones are like, let's say you want the product, but you work at a office, or you go to an university, you study basically, and you cannot stay at home. Why? You cannot accept the product at home. So what you would do, the delivery people would go and drop your product at a fulfillment center. Later on,
I know that because
right.
I was checking out University of Southern California, and one
Right.
guy was there for their masters, and he's told me that he was picking up his stuff from Amazon, like there was lots of
Fulfillment center.
containers and like
Right,
lockers,
right,
kind of
exactly.
locker stuff.
Perfectly. Absolutely like that. Absolutely like that. So your item would be, a person is carrying that, right? Because once you're in the road, it has to be manual. A person has to go out. There has to be a postman or something like that, who's taking your stuff. And for every stuff, the postman is instructed that this is your locker number. So take your book. This is this book. You take that book and put it in locker number 123. So he puts that in locker 123. It opens up and it puts it in. Now later on, when I go, whenever I am free, whenever I have the time to go to that fulfillment center, I'll go and pick it up from there. Right. Now,
Right.
all of this stuff, like all of this stuff, locker number 123, why not 124? Because if I somehow put it, if the person somehow puts it to 124, that item might never be found. Like there would be a huge mistake, right? I will go, I'll check 123, I'll not get that product. I cannot open 124 because that is not my locker. So all of this is part of algorithms. Softwares find out like when would locker would open up, when would it be available for booking. So I would say like hundreds of algorithms work beneath the all of this, and including payment, including delivery, including graph algorithms, which find out like what is the optimum path, like should be followed, or maybe what is the closest warehouse. So things like that, lots of algorithms work in, and behind the scenes we don't get to know. But I think if you're I think the idea is pretty much clear now. So
Yeah,
what happens
absolutely.
after you book the product and goes to you? But I would highlight that you can create a simple application, you can create a simple website, but I think logistics is the part where 90% of e-commerce websites suffer the most. Like if you do not deliver the product at the right time. So I recently came across this Hong Kong based or South Korea based, I'm not sure. So I recently came across this company who promised that if you book a product today at night by 11 or 12, we will deliver it tomorrow by 7 a.m. in the morning at your doorstep. So
Yeah.
that's a huge challenge they are taking, and they're able to take that challenge because I'm not sure where they are operating, but their city is small, their town is small, right? They are able to do that. So I think 90%. So you can create a huge website, you can contact a lot of merchants, but delivering the product. So everything is software till then, right? Everything is software. But when the software meets real life, when the software meets, when you have real interactions, when you have external world interactions, that's when things get complicated. So logistics, delivery unit, supply management, all of that unit manages and deals with that stuff.
All right, all right. Here's an interesting
Yeah.
story. Like when I was in
Yeah.
my third year, no, I guess in my second year, I also wanna started a e-commerce business, and I also had an investor. But I
Okay.
at back then I wasn't very sure that I would pull this off, so I
Okay.
gave it up. And I didn't know
Okay.
there's a lots of, like, I had customers, I had lots of customers, but I didn't have any idea how can I deliver the product at the right time. Now after 3 years, I came to understand there is a lots of supply chain management chain is going on, and
Definitely.
logistics and going on, that if I was started back then doing this, I might not have pulled this out because I didn't have the capacity of doing this logistics things all by myself. So it's kind of really hard.
We can we can actually pull it off. So that's you must have known. So I would not name them, but there are several startups which are doing this kind of business. Like for example, in Bangalore, when I used to stay at Bangalore, so you book and you tell me. So I would say that I have left my. Your mother has cooked the food for me. So I would call these guys. I would say that pick that food from your place and bring it to my. So there are people who are doing just this business, just the logistics business. So
All
you can
right,
understand that such a huge business is a part of another business.
all right, all right.
So there's definitely lots of complexities involved. And when you're doing it at a huge scale, so when you're delivering out, like thousands and thousands of order every day, it has to be systematic. There has to be some processes followed and some kind of reportings involved. So it automatically becomes complicated.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So
exactly.
that's
Like one, like I recently came across one. I guess that was in Delhi, like delivery or something. I guess that's the name. I
delivery.
get,
Yeah.
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 That
Yeah.
they,
Delivery.
you. I guess you were interning with one of them, like delivery or something.
I was no.
No, it
I
might
think
not
I
be
think
you. It might be one of our
I
senior.
interviewed for them. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I interviewed for them. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were doing this logistics business, and I was checking out their website, and they
Right.
were doing this exact same thing. And I didn't know the importance of this logistics until now when you have explained that
Okay.
there's so much well.
Okay.
So my next question is obvious that like you are working with lots of data, right? How can you handle
Right.
that?
Right. Okay. So first of all, data is like oil in this generation,
Yeah,
right? So data is the most precious information to any company, any big companies usually. Google is Google just 90% because of its data, right? They can follow everything we are doing. Yeah. So at big companies or at companies, there are softwares that handle big data. And in terms of big data, I mean petabytes of data. So you have softwares which stream large number of data. Let's say multi-processing, they use multi-processing, and like they have large pipelines where lots of data come in. They have an ETL tool where the extraction happens, processing happens, and they are transformed. So if I want to name some of them, you have Hadoop, you have Kafka, Apache has, I think your audience would most probably would know about Apache. It's like a very big
Yeah. I
open
was
source
thinking that
network.
that's I was reading that Apache and Spark, I guess that's the name.
Right. So Spark is one of the tool that is so there are multiple tools. There is not one. There is no one single tool that can manage all of it. So you have different tools for different stages of that pipeline. So when a data comes in, first and foremost, you want to process. Before even processing, you want to store that somewhere. You want to store it in a warehouse so that in future, if you need it, you can access it. So while a copy of that is gets stored somewhere, parallelly you are processing a chunk of that. Chunk by chunk you're processing it and doing something with that. And that can be anything. That can be analyzing that can be running algorithms on that can be doing machine learning on that. It can be anything. It can be a lot of things.
All
So
right.
I think, yeah, there are huge teams. There are data engineering teams at companies like big companies that deal with data. We have data engineers. So this new term has evolved recently. It's called data engineers. And apart from data science and machine learning engineers, data engineer is a new term that has a new role, I would say, that has evolved just because we are working with so much data every day. So data engineering, I'm not very sure about the thing, but it's, as far as I've heard from my network, and they have told, like, it's more about cleaning data, making it ready for use, basically, so that engineers, machine learning engineers, and data scientists could work with that.
All right, all right.
Yeah.
So, like you have stated that there these new things are coming up, like data engineers, and we had always known that data scientists and machine learning engineers. And you were also involved in lots of machine learning like programs and like communities.
Right.
Like you were in Google ML facilitator, and you were mentoring in TensorFlow. Like, could you tell me how's that
Sure.
experience helped you becoming who you are right now?
Right, definitely. So, machine learning was something I learned. I started learning when I was in my second year of undergraduate, and so it was. So I started machine learning with a simple course on. It's a very simple course on Coursera. I guess Andrew Ng, you have heard about him,
Yeah, I am
right?
doing that. I am
Many
doing that
people
right
have heard
now.
about him.
I am doing that right
Oh,
now.
that's great.
Like
That's
I was
great. So I
thinking about,
started
like,
with that course.
I was thinking about, like, should I do this because I don't know Octave, and I guess Python is much more beneficial for me, but I still went up
Right.
doing this.
Right. I also had that same doubt when I started. But right now, I think there are many courses that help you get started in machine learning. But when I started, like 2 years, 3 years back, there were like comparatively lesser courses and lesser resources available online. Nowadays, too, there are so many things, everything is available online. So I found that course trustworthy to start with. So that was my start journey. And from that, I went into, developing some projects and got an internship at a small startup company in out of Delhi,
Yeah, that was Zyker,
and
right?
I worked with them. Yes, that was Zyker. And so that's how it started initially. I started my learning and went into doing internships. And I was later on noticed by, so talking about, first I would talk about Google that you mentioned. So I was noticed by, it's a so companies, like some of the companies have like community leaders. So Google had a community leader, and she noticed me and reached out to me regarding they have the program going on. So she asked me if I'm interested, I want to enroll for that or not. So I enrolled it, and they selected. They had an interview. We had an interview. The program was called Explore ML, and I think this year also it's probably happening once again. So I would give you the link to that. I would give you the link to that. You can put it along with this description or wherever, people who might find it interesting. So I applied for that. I got selected, and around 80 to 90 people were selected from a country. So from there, they took us to their Bangalore office, Google's Bangalore office, and we interacted with lots of Google engineers, and they trained us on some of the tools that people that we basically they trained us in a way so that we train other people, right? So we were a medium to train other people. So that's why we were called like facilitators and instructors, so that they taught us some of the things and how things happen at Google. So we got to learn a lot as well there. And we came out of that, and like there were facilitators from each part, all over the country, and we went back to our universities and neighboring universities. We taught our people, like we taught our classmates, we taught our batchmates about machine learning. And that was the main core main the main vision of Google, to spread machine learning awareness to everyone, especially in our age group. And then there was this very interesting open source, like open source, what do you call, so have you heard of open source GSOC, like Google Summer of Code?
Yeah.
So Google
I
Summer
heard that.
Right. So Google Summer of Code is basically an open source software development festival, I would say. Not exactly festival, but an event. Open source software
Like
development
kind of like
event
a
where
boot camp.
uh, not exactly a boot camp, I would say an event where like there are lots of applications coming in, they get selected, and let's say 50 people are selected, and they work with companies, right? They work virtually with companies. So a senior from our college, he worked with Sugar Labs, and so there are multiple companies. So even Google enroll themselves. So there are, let's say, 100 companies. They have small requirements, software requirements, and they want people to work on that. So they register, they get shortlisted, and they work on those projects in a collaborative environment all over the world. Since it's completely virtual, they get to work completely like global people. So my teammate could be from New Zealand, my teammate could be from New York. So it's really amazing. And the great thing is, after you complete that program, if you could successfully complete it, so there's a very good certificate that Google gives by themselves from themselves, and there's some sum of money as well as a prize. So that's cool. But that thing has a restriction. So you need to be at least 17 years, I guess, 17 or 18 to register for that. So Google also introduced this program called Google Coding, CODEIN. So in this program, what they focused on preschool students. So basically, school students. So preschool, as in, don't take it in Indian sense. You in US and other outside, they call school as the college as the school. So preschool means for us, it's the school students. So they wanted school students to learn coding, to like to interact into open source development, open source contribution. So Google Coding is the platform that is equivalent to Google Summer of Code, but for people under the age of 16 and 17. So we had a lot of like pretty amazing kids, and they were so excited to code, and they were pretty good, I would say. Like they were very good, and I found that opportunity very interesting. So I wanted to interact how like the kids of next generation, they're coming up. So I wanted to know how cool they are. Like, so I signed up for mentorship, and I reached out to Google TensorFlow product manager. So at Google California, the TensorFlow is a product of Google, and they have a product manager there. So I reached out to her, and she said, yes, sure. Like we would love to have a mentor for this. And they had a few mentors there. So they selected me as a mentor, and yeah, that was it. I was basically interacting with a lot of students there. Like I remember one student, he developed this interesting thing called, like the most interesting thing about those students was the curiosity they have to learn new things. Like those things, even that much curiosity, even we don't have. Like people more above our age, like elderly people, they don't have that much curiosity. Like they have done so much. Like they are learning so much. They are constantly asking questions, and they're like telling, "I'm developing this." So this guy was really interesting. I came across him. So he developed this quiz on TensorFlow. So it's not much technically highly difficult, but he basically developed a quiz application. He collected a set of questions only on TensorFlow. So if someone is learning TensorFlow, he can use that application to judge how much he knows TensorFlow. Basically, domain-based question from TensorFlow. He collected that in a simple Excel sheet, and he created a small application, small Android application to take data from that sheet, and just a simple quiz application, like an MCQ question type of application. It was so cool. Like he shared it with me. I really liked it. Like also there were other people who were introduced to GitHub for the first time, who didn't know to how to raise a pull request, how to write commits. So yeah, that was really a nice experience for me to interact with the young people who are going to be the next generation of engineers.
Yeah, wow. Like I know this for a fact. Like when I we were like on that stage, we never had these opportunities, and I am very
Definitely.
happy that our education system has already put this plan on their national education policy for like preschool students learn coding, and I'm really glad
Right.
that they already have mentors like you to help them, and all this open
Okay.
source project.
Yeah.
I just wish if I had these kinds of people with me, I should
True,
have
man.
started that. But here we
True.
are.
Like the guy, we every like I think this is like I don't know. Like we feel like if we had a proper guidance, maybe 2 or 3 years back, so we would have been at a different place right now. So I
Yeah,
think that is very like. But I mean, it's great to see such companies, like big companies, coming up and helping, focusing on that part of the education, like small students. Because I think after 10 years, after 5 years, even coding is going to be more important than like English. Like
yeah, exactly.
as
Like
much as people are
it's very important right now. Like I was seeing that video of Nas Daily, and he said
okay.
after 20
Yeah,
years, each and every person either have to learn coding or have to do
right,
something that makes them employable, because everything
correct.
lots of job like there's a exactly the like what's the term, the high class people, middle class people, and that was the name of no class people or not class. They're no class. They don't have jobs because lots of jobs are going to be automated. Like he was doing that. Over 13 million drivers in this world, and they are going to lose job
Okay,
because of this autonomous driving. So
okay, okay.
they
Yeah,
also have, and that's only is happening because of these coders. So if people start coding
right.
from very early age, like a lots of countries are doing, that will be really good.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of an opportunity also for us. Like, not only us, because the people who are coming up, because like we started learning coding coming at college or at school, right? So if somehow like we understood like that is where our world is going, so we are headed towards that generation where you have to know coding has to be another language apart from English, Hindi, whatever language, you should know at least some little bit of coding, right?
Yeah, you have
So
to
why not?
understand what is going on.
Exactly. And if you could, so like solving problems, writing code, they take a different mindset. They take a different mindset outside the like away from the external world. And if somehow you could bring in that mindset earlier in the age, like for young people who are quite earlier in their career, I think they'll get much more time to develop themselves, and that's definitely very positive.
Yeah, I exactly the way you said that. I just remember the thing Bill Gates said that. Bill Gates said that coding like helped me imagine things in a different way that I couldn't have do it with if I didn't know coding. So
Right.
it was really like grateful for me because like my school, like high school, they didn't have a computer science major, so I had to go for to
Okay.
biology. And when I started my
Right.
college, I started my first programming language when I was already 18. So
Okay.
that was 18. But if our new education policies or all over the world people start coding from at least 10 or 12 years old, that will be really great.
Definitely. And I think we would see innovation at a different scale at that point.
Yeah, yeah,
Because
exactly.
as new people come in and they have such innovative thinking, so much curiosity, so the way we think is very different from the way people younger than us think. So
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
we are going to see,
Like
yeah,
exactly the thing. Like you actually the this is the very first thing I was meaning to ask you, that you have told me that you have done machine learning stuff. So I was asking you that if a complete beginner, like if this is a high school kid is watching this and he wants to
right,
start machine learning, he like the right now point is either you have to go Coursera or Udemy or go to a higher education where you can learn machine learning from the very
right,
scratch. But in future
right,
there might not be a need for higher education, and lots of people might not want that higher education, like
right,
lots of people doesn't. So what's your
right,
best
right.
advice for them to start on machine learning, on this data
Yes,
analysis stuff?
definitely. Definitely. So, to be a proper machine learner, I think like lots of people are straight away recently jumping into machine learning, doing courses, and since there are so many courses available now on the internet, people are jumping on them and building projects with that without knowing how it's coming from. So, machine learning is a field that was there 60 years back, or I'm not sure with the number, but long time back in the 90s and 80s, right? And it has been there, it's not something new, right? So but the thing is, just because our computation became cheaper, so we have faster access to CPUs and things that are for a less amount of money, and they have got cheaper, so we can do it at home, right? We can do machine learning on a personal laptop. That was not possible at a, let's say, 10 years back. So that is why this field emerged, got a boom suddenly. But I think to be a proper machine learning engineer or a data scientist, you should know the fundamentals very well. And by fundamentals, I mean linear algebra is one, statistics is two, and and a language like Python or R. So that will help you code those algorithms or maybe write those visualizations. Python or R, and many people ask why, when Python, when R. I would say there's nothing like that. Just go with the one you want, which one you feel comfortable. So for me, I chose Python because I found that I already knew a bit of Python, and I thought it's easier for me if I learn more on that which I know rather than starting something new. So, but I am completely, like support people who are learning R instead of Python, and it's not at all debatable. Like both have very good community support. So yeah, like these three things are main, and once you have these three things done very well, even if not very well, because linear algebra is something, linear algebra, calculus, these are something you already learn in your school, right? Like 11 and 12 standard, you learn them. You just need to brush them up and add a few more concepts. And right now on YouTube and online, there are really good channels, really good people who are teaching linear algebra. Like for example, 3B one, three black, one blue,
No, no,
or
three blue, one
three brown, one black,
Grant Sanderson.
grandson, right? So so they have very good linear algebra courses, and you can even take courses on Coursera, Udemy, so for learning statistics. And you don't have to be a master at that, but understanding a bit of what is happening, what is basically happening, what are the basic theorems, that would help you understand the algorithms in machine learning. And machine learning is completely based on maths. So if you don't know the maths, if you just think you can import libraries and like import libraries and use them, train your data, so at some point of time you would not be able to progress further, and you would not be able to understand what's happening. So I would suggest people to take some time, let's say 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, to understand the maths behind it, and then take 2 months to learn the language very well. And if you learn the language very well, you'll be writing much more efficient code. And if there are 100 engineers applying for a job or giving a test, top 10 engineers would only write efficient code. So if you know the language very well, if you know how to use the language properly, language is nothing, just a tool, right? So you can use Java, you can use R, you can use Python. They are just like tools to write the algorithm. So take that tool as something you need to learn in, let's say, 1 or 2 months, and learn it very well, and use that tool to write algorithms, and that's it. So there are lots of courses online for learning basics of machine learning nowadays, and I think like just a Google, they are just a Google search away. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's it, I
So
think. And definitely another, yeah,
yeah.
just one addition, I would say, build projects. So once you're done with that, don't just stop and go apply to companies. Build projects enough. So every algorithm that you learn, try to apply them. There is a website called kaggle.com where you get problem, like example problems every week. Every week they have contests. I think not even every week, they are concurrent contests. They keep on happening, and you have contests. So just take a contest, participate in it, take the data set. They even provide you free data set. Take the data set and try to build a model on that, and see how accurate you are, how good you are writing algorithms, code. So also you'll get to learn from other people. The code is openly available. Everyone's code is openly available. You can learn from that. So yeah, that's, I think, would be the key to learning machine learning. In, let's say, all of this would take maybe, if done properly, 6 to 7 months.
All right, all right. Because I just recently started on machine learning, because my domain is actually virtual simulation, and I wanted my
Right.
like stuffs to automate it. Like I actually wanted to make a self-driving car using deep learning. And when I started learning on deep learning, that is like I didn't know what is this artificial neural network is doing, what is convolutional neural network is doing, and I didn't know what is happening. So I thought, okay, let's have a machine learning background and
Huh.
start from the basic. So this answer actually helped me as well. Well, one of the things you have talked is like doing projects. Obviously, you have done a lots of projects. You have done Udacity course also. So I saw one of your course that was, I guess, breast cancer implementation or using deep learning. So
Right,
would you like to
right.
talk about that?
Sure, sure. So that was a project that was funded and supported by IEEE Computer Society. So they basically supported us. It was an inter-college team. So a few people from, so basically few colleges from Kolkata were selected, and teams were formed. Cross college teams were formed, and we were given individual topics. So that's the topic we selected for. So the topic was, basically we had to develop algorithm, a model, hypothesis. Basically, you would get, how would I present this? So, if you when we have cancer, or when not sorry, when patients have cancer and they have histopathological scans, right? So scans of the tumor cells, and they look pretty much colorful, and the cells have, it's like deep skin level scans, and they basically say where is the inflammation, where is the tumor, and what is the state of that tumor, how much spread it is, right? So they are called histopathological scan reports. So these reports are used by physicians, doctors, to see the state of the cancer. Like, is it very, is it what kind of state? Like, is it in a bad state? Is it going to, like, in carcinoma? What kind? There are like different states, like passive, active. What kind of cancer it is? It's going to spread. It's malignant, right? Non-malignant. So this is what the physicians, doctors do from their experience, because they have learned about it. They have been trained properly, with the proper schooling for that, doctor schooling for that, and they do it out of experience. So why cannot we train a machine to do that? Like, what if we thought, like, what if we give the machine enough examples? Like, let's say this is a report, and this is a malignant cancer, and this is a report, and this is a non-malignant tumor. So if we could create enough number of mappings for that, and if we could create, like, create patterns from that, right? If you could create patterns from that input reports, maybe we can train our machine, train our algorithm to understand, like, given any kind of report, approximately, could you tell me what kind of cancer it is, whether it's really dangerous or whether we have time to treat that, what stage it is in. So we built an algorithm on that, and we got the data from a very trusted source. Basically, IEEE only helped us in getting that. Uh, we trained our model, and we got an accuracy of 89.2%, and that was at par with the state of the art model at that time, 3 years, 2.5 years back. So right now there are better algorithms that do that thing, but take in much more computational power. So that was what we did. And we also developed a very simple application where you would just drop in your histopathological report as a PNG file or JPG file inside that application, and it would just tell you. It would take around 1 or 2 minutes to predict it, because it's quite a complex algorithm that goes behind. And after 1 or 2 minutes, it would give you a report like what stage of cancer it is. So the main thought process we had behind it was, like, there can be true negatives, true positives, right? For example, the doctor does some mistake. The doctor does some mistake in understanding the cancer, and he says that you have 3 months to treat this, but maybe the cancer is really in a bad state, right? And the person doesn't get that much time, and somehow, sadly, unfortunately, he dies. So what if we do not want to replace the doctors, but experience, humans have errors. So what if we could use a second level of check? So maybe our system could use, maybe after checking with the doctors, we can bring in our system to do a cross check. And if both of them agree that on a decision, so go ahead with that. So that was our approach. And very happily, we also won with that project. We won Technergize, which is competition, which is a hackathon organized by IEEE. And that was, we were the national winner. So there were teams from NIT, BITS Pilani. So people, like, there were really cool projects. So I remember one project which was a drowsiness detection. So basically, truck drivers, if they, after driving for long hours, the eyes generally tend to close. There is some kind of drowsiness, sleepiness involved. So whenever there would be some drowsiness, your eyes would be closing a bit. There would be an alarm that would be going up, and basically you would have to set up camera in front of the driver, the window panel. And that was a project like that. So drowsiness detection, and there were other really cool projects. So gladly we won that. And I think the drowsiness was came the runner up. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that was the
Actually,
project.
I was looking into that website, and I actually saw each and every one of the project. And your project was very interesting, and I saw the drowsiness project. And one other project was interesting, that I guess they have built a robot to generate 3D maps from unknown terrains or something.
Right. Yes, I do not remember. It's like long back, but most probably yes. Like, there were many projects, more than 10,
Yeah,
12,
it
10,
was
12,
really,
I would say less. Lots of projects.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
really fascinating for me, because we all are self-taught. Like, whatever you are doing right now or you have done, you are a self-taught person. Like, you have done courses from like Coursera and Udemy and Udacity, and it's really inspiring that people who are seeing this know that they don't have to go to another college to learn this. They can learn this on their own. And even if they have an option to go to a college, they don't have to. Even people who are like a lot older than us, like 40 or 35 on their age, and they want to do something different on their life, they don't have an option to go to another college or university. They can learn this on their own. So this is a really great explanation from your side, and I'm
Right.
really happy that you came to my show and explained all this stuff.
Thank you so much
Uh,
for inviting me.
it's actually my pleasure. So I will be ending this with a last question,
Sure.
like, give us any advice for the absolute beginners. Doesn't matter to who are in their age. like maybe they're 40,
Correct.
maybe they're 10, it doesn't matter, who are going to in this software engineering and this machine learning industry, what will be your best advice for them?
Be curious, keep learning. I would suggest like software engineering or machine learning or anything that's anyone who's a developer, any kind of developer, you have to keep learning. You have to like this is a field. I've heard from my parents that doctors, engineers, lawyers, these are three of the top professions where you have to keep learning no matter what is your age. So you have to keep on skilling up yourselves. And I think as a developer, you are constantly developing something new or something new that is at least new for yourself. You're building new things, so you have to learn every day. So always compare yourself with yourself. Don't compare yourself with someone else. So compare yourself with who you were yesterday and see if you are growing anyhow. If you are growing, so be curious, keep on learning, and that's it. Don't shy away from challenges. You will definitely succeed.
All right, all right. Thanks, Amit. Thanks for coming to my show. And I guess each and everyone who will be seeing this or who are seeing this, might get enough value from their side. Thank you so much for coming to this show.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Thank you so much for inviting me.
All right,
All the
all
best.
right.
Happy coding to everyone.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
the best to
Thanks.
everyone. Happy coding. Yeah.
All right.